Okay. So for those of you, many of you have joined us for the last few sessions, but a number of you are relatively new to the series. So I want to welcome you if you are joining us for the first time. I am Jillian Moyes. I am a PhD candidate in sociology. I also serve as this year's graduate student advisor to the Dean and Chancellor. At some point during the presentation, I'll make sure to go ahead and put my email address in the chat. In case you have any questions for me, you'll be able to reach me that way. I just want to also talk a little bit about the series. So this Tuesday Talks with Alumni series was actually developed as part of my GSADC project in collaboration with key graduate studies staff, including Jessica Fayla Ward, who's joining us on the call today. And this Spring Quarter series is designed to provide graduate students an opportunity to informally connect with advanced degree alumni who have successfully navigated graduate school at UC Davis and come from diverse academic fields and professional backgrounds. So throughout the series, each alum will share their experience and personal perspectives on a professional development topic of their choosing. After today's talk, we'll have 5 more sessions during the months of April and May. And I'll also make sure to drop the link for the remaining sessions as well at some point during the presentation. So before I introduce today's speaker, I just want to go over a couple of quick housekeeping items. One, you'll see that we have, as we have had for the last few sessions as well, live transcription available. So if you don't see that automatically popping up on your screen, you should be able to hit the live transcription button on the bottom, and that should pull up the closed captioning at the bottom for you there. There should also be a link to a separate website if you want to look at the transcription that way as well. Also, throughout the presentation, if we could just ask to remember to keep your mics muted. After the talk, we'll have roughly 15 or 20 minutes for questions, at which point you can use the raise hand function and I will be moderating that section of the talk, or you can type your questions in the chat, which I will then read aloud. So without further ado, I'm excited to introduce today's speaker who will be giving our presentation on jobs outside the academy. So Dr. Alice Fitzpatrick, she's a true Aggie who obtained her PhD in molecular, cellular, and integrative physiology in 2010, her doctorate in veterinary medicine in 2007, and her bachelor's in animal science in 2002, all from UC Davis. Currently, Alice is an R&D scientist who has contributed to early drug discovery and development for multiple program areas in large pharma, biotech, and medical device companies in the Boston area. Prior to this, Alice completed a postdoctoral research fellowship at Massachusetts General Hospital, as well as part of her dissertation thesis at the National Institutes of Health. Much of Alice's research interests in gastrointestinal physiology, metabolic disease, obesity, and diabetes have continued to be applied in her industry roles, but since then have grown to include many other disease areas, research platforms, and increasingly non-lab-based responsibilities. Shadowing and collaborating with multiple academic, industry, and government institutions, as well as participation in a mentoring program led by the Healthcare Business Women's Association have been fundamental in guiding her career decisions and development. Please help me in virtually welcoming Dr. Alice Fitzpatrick today. Thank you. Feel free to take it away.
Hi, thanks, Jillian. Can everyone hear me just fine?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to try to share my screen. Is that possible?
Yes.
Or do you want to? Sorry about that.
There you go. You should be able to share now.
Great. Mm-hmm. Thanks for having me here and for the opportunity to get reconnected with UC Davis. It's been a long time since I've been back, and thankfully with, one of the silver linings, I guess, with Picnic Day was that I got to actually see some of Picnic Day online from Boston, so it's been great. I'm here to talk about an aspect of I think is important for anyone who is early in their career to have a bit of an exposure to, which is jobs outside the academy, which may be something that you may not have known or is looking for getting more information about. Before I get started, though, I wanted to get a sense of who's here. Jillian, could you put up the poll? My first question I have for people is, in what field are you obtaining your degree in STEM, humanities, or others? Okay, this is great. This is my first time with the poll, so this is really cool. All right, great. From what I can see, the vast majority of you are in STEM fields. So I am in a STEM-based field, so it is more geared towards roles in STEM, and particularly in industry. But for those of you who are in the humanities, social sciences, education, in those fields, there are some areas that apply to you too that not necessarily require having a STEM degree, but if you are open to science, would also work for you, as well as some tips of how to move forward as well. Let me just share those results just to let you know what I'm seeing here. A lot of you are in STEM. My second question now that I'm just curious to know what your perspective is a true-false question, and that is career success as a PhD is tied to obtaining a faculty position. I'm really glad that this is really interesting. This is great. I'm just going to show this now just because I think it's really, I'm actually really happy to see this, that all of you say this is false, which is great. Because in general, you know, there are so many avenues that a PhD can go into that's not necessarily an academic position. When I had started, I think you know, for me, it was the gold standard. And it was really, it took a long time to realize that there are other avenues out there, particularly when, you know, this is data back from 10 years ago, that the number of faculty positions that are available compared to the number of PhDs award is a lot lower than is available to fill. And because of that, all the PhDs in general are being hired in other areas. This is data from the National Science Foundation that's been tracking PhD recipients over the last 20 years. And it's, you know, you can see that over time, the number of PhD recipients are being increasingly employed by industry that equal or even surpassing that of academic jobs. And that really, you know, depends on which field you're in, and particularly in STEM, vast majority are being hired in industry or in nonprofit or government sectors. May not be as much the case with arts and humanities and social sciences education, but there's still a good portion of people that do go off outside of the academy. To give you a bit more perspective of where I came from, so I came from a different mold, so to speak, since I my PhD in conjunction with a veterinary degree with the intent of doing research, a veterinary researcher position, whether that be in academia, which was actually my top choice, to be a veterinarian doing research in a veterinary school and doing teaching and all that would be of a faculty member, but also keeping my eye on industry and government roles as a veterinary researcher mostly, which hasn't really played out the way that I thought. But because I was on an academic trajectory, I went and did a postdoc, mainly so I get more translational from some of the basic science that I was doing, but also to get some more experience with grant writing, which I knew was really important for an academic career, and which I find out later is also really important when you're in industry as well. So it's not necessarily only for academics for grant writing. But when it came through the next couple of years in my postdoc, I realized at this inflection point that I needed to make decisions of where I wanted to go. And I had to really think hard about what is it that I like to do? What is it that really motivated me? And what really motivated me was that I liked understanding biology. I loved understanding diseases and how that affects normal physiology, and how can you use that? How can you use that knowledge to help find therapies? And I realized that I could find that in industry, and also taking into account what I wanted in my personal life as well, in terms of where I wanted to live and work-life balance. Industry became a pretty clear winner, and when I was given the opportunity, I took it. And from there, I started off as a bench scientist, mostly at a large pharma company at Pfizer, in the disease area that I had been studying, and then moved on to smaller biotechs and also into medical devices. What I'm going to share with you is kind of like a snippet of kind of a portrait of what this drug discovery is and what I do. And along the way, I have people from my network that I've known from my PhD training and also through undergrad that have gone on and what they've done and how they got there, and hope this will help in terms of understanding certain roles. So what I do primarily is I work in preclinical development, trying to identify new therapeutics, and working really cross-functionally with other disciplines internally in the company, as well as with academic collaborators and with contract research organizations, and establishing the cell-based platforms to screen therapies and design the relevant models and execute the relative models to show proof of concept that this will actually work before we go into clinic, and also safety. And that, the long game of it, regardless of where you go, is the develop a path towards a drug application to go into clinical trials. And in a smaller company, even more so, trying to help create the value of what you're doing, to convince investors that it's worth funding to keep your program alive. So very much like in academia, where you're writing grants to fund your lab, you're also trying to help fund, in a small company, the work that you're doing. And a lot of the skill sets that I've learned through my graduate career has really helped that, and I've only developed that further as I've gone along in my journey. So before I talk about other roles outside of drug discovery, the main question that really is going to be on you to look at is who are you as a person, and what is it about your PhD or the field of study, if you're not, or your field of study, that you enjoy the most, and what really motivates you? What do you care about? What are you good at? And answering those questions, putting them on paper, can help you in the decision of what type of non-academic role will work for you. Or even if you find that you really like academia, then that's great. Knowing yourself and knowing what you like and what you can do will really help with that. In regards to different types of roles, I kind of divided this by lab-based versus non-lab-based roles. These are roles that I've encountered across through industry mostly, but a lot of these also overlap with nonprofit as well as government sectors. For those in R&D and STEM-based fields, R&D is usually the most straightforward path when it comes to utilizing your bench skills to research and discovery, whether it's a disease-relevant biology or product development if you're a chemist or an engineer or a molecular biologist, or in a supportive side, which is like biostats, bioinformatics, data science. But there's also roles in CMC, which stands for clinical chemistry, manufacturing controls, which is basically setting up the protocols and the methodization and manufacturing your product, and also the quality of that, making sure that this is actually the same every single time. It's a very technical role. Working in a CRO or a contract research organization, these are people that actually help support the work that industry and government are doing. And oftentimes PhDs and also PhDs can go into being study directors and managing their own labs, doing that particular work. A lot of times people go from these lab-based roles into non-lab-based roles who've had some time in industry to see how it works, and then also getting exposed to these other areas that often I've never even heard of until I started working in biotech particularly, such as commercial development. If you like, for example, marketing and sales, if you're a scientist, you can go into that. You have a bit of an upper hand in terms of the scientific acumen for that, but non-STEM fields are very equipped for commercial development. Communications is a really huge area right now for PhD scientists who are interested in education and teaching, but not necessarily working in a teaching institute. And that encompasses the science as well as teaching medical professionals or other scientists when it comes to, say, for example, a field or technical specialist who knows the ins and outs of a product and likes to talk to people and help troubleshoot their issues. Reg affairs is a big area that both industry and government share. I have a snippet from a case study for that that I'll go into more in depth. Policy advocacy for those who are interested in understanding how that works and like to communicate and implement programs. that's something, another role that a lot of nonprofits as well as government sectors are in. For engineers or those who really like innovation and seeing how new things are developed and how those are applied in industry patent securing patents is the biggest thing to ensure that they actually have ownership to something. A lot of science PhDs and also science masters candidates end up going into patent law, and I'll have also a case study on that. Business development, if you like setting up collaborations and looking at what other people are doing, that's an area that a lot of R&D people actually end up going into after a few years in industry, who really want to stay connected with the academic side of things, as well as work along with other kinds of companies. And if you're really entrepreneurial and want to be business minded, venture capitalism, the types of the companies that like to fund companies often use technical people to understand what biotechs are trying to sell and whether or not to give money to them, as well as if you really are entrepreneurial and want to start up your own startup company, that's also a role that's not lab-based, but also lab-based, because oftentimes you are in the lab if you are starting up a company. A couple case studies. If, again, looking at what you like to do. If this is Jill is a friend of mine that I met through my postdoc, who got her PhD at Columbia, and she ended up starting off her career after her postdoc as a medical science liaison, and now is working in medical affairs. What is that exactly? That's basically an area where you're shaping the medical strategy of a product to educate the community about not only the disease that you're working on, but also the product that you're developing to help them. And so they are very involved in looking at the information that's being put out, making sure it's scientifically, medically rigorous, and meeting with healthcare professionals about their product. They often will be involved in going to conferences and talking to people, as well as be involved in publications. She wanted to be involved in the translational aspect of science, and she loved talking about science, loved talking to people, interacting with people, and that was really up her alley, and that's where she went. That doesn't really require additional formal training. It's just more of utilizing her skill set and her inner passion for education for that. In a similar vein, you meet another Jill Dunham. Just to let you know, when I have pictures on here and their full name, they're actually open to talking to you. So if you wanted to talk to them more, you can also ask. She is a medical writer. Again, an area where a lot of technical people can go into. And she actually develops and makes those training materials in the medical affairs groups and also in other formats as well. And she found out about this career through actually a development committee seminar from her alma mater, where an alum named Emma Hitt, who's actually a freelance medical writer who has a website dedicated to how to become a freelance medical writer, got her interested in that pathway, and she explored that pathway, taking contract writing positions during her PhD and postdoc, and that's what led her to where she is. It takes a lot of self-discipline and motivation to do that, and a love for learning all kinds of science, because it's not in areas often that's where she started from, and being able to work with clients that may not agree with her on when she does make these materials. Most of her time is on the computer. It is not at the lab at all, but she still gets to be part of the science. Again, she didn't have to have any additional training, but getting her foot in the door by taking contract positions has really helped her a lot to get where she is today. And an area that I never thought of as a scientist going into law, it's actually not as uncommon as I thought until I started working with Lisa Geller, who is a head of IP, head of intellectual property at a small biotech. She got her PhD a long time ago as a neuroscientist. I was at the bench for a long time until she decided to go into patent law. And what she does is she still talks to a lot of R&D scientists, asks a lot of questions. She loves the science and talks about it. And she looks and sees what kinds of the ideas and the data that are generated by these scientists, what could be considered an invention, and make up and write the patents in the language that is required to write patents. She also helps mold the company's business strategy if they're looking to go do a certain modality for a disease area. For example, she can look up the current intellectual property landscape out there to see where the niche is that's not been filled that the company can fill. She also does a lot more than that when it comes to patent law, and that requires, liking to do a lot of writing, a lot of reading, a willingness to learn a lot of new material quickly, critical thinking, and being detail oriented. For that, you don't need a PhD. You can get through with masters, and particularly engineering and in biotech. All you need to do really is to pass the patent bar. And even that, you don't necessarily have to go to law school, but most people do. And you could actually get the experience by working at law firms if you're interested. And oftentimes they can help you pay for night law school if that's the case. Very different field. She likes to talk about science. She's not at the bench, but she gets to really critically analyze what other people are doing and finding ways to help develop drugs in a different way. So those are some roles. There's a lot out there, and there's not a lot that I can fit in a short time. But there's another one I will talk about more. But there's different people that I can also help in terms of finding in these different roles. Just to speak to nonprofit organizations, they're actually very similar to industry. The main difference is that while industry is really product driven, where they're making a product, either a clinical like a clinical drug or therapeutic or device, or even a product to sell to other medical areas. Nonprofits are mission driven, where they're really doing what they're doing because they want to help a cause. And that covers, again, the gamut of a lot of the roles I mentioned in, previously of actual just bench research, if you like that. Research institutes like Howard Hughes and Scripps are research science or research support sciences. Project management, advocacy, outreach, communications. Foundations, for example, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, their mission is to address poverty, disease, and inequity around the world. And that covers all the different areas of roles that are there, including bench research. They have a medical foundation specifically to help with accelerating the development of vaccines for the developing world. And then there are scientific societies like AAAS or professional associations. All are also nonprofit that may not be in the bench research side of things, but they are big on advocacy, outreach, and communication when it comes to advancing science. There's a lot of different organizations out there, and if it's something where you value more, helping a cause and agreeing with helping with that cause, those are great opportunities around. Below here are some websites that list some of these that, if you're interested, you can look at. As for government, the government sector is meant for serving public interest. And there are three primary areas of government type roles that are different areas of government roles. One is obviously research. There are lots of intramural research programs across departments in the government. NIH, for example, we often think as our main funding agency, but there's a lot of intramural research that goes on there as well that I got to see while I was a graduate student doing some of my dissertation there. The CDC, also another area that does a lot of research for physical and atmospheric earth sciences. NOAA, NASA, they do a lot of intramural research as well that take a gamut of different types of science fields as well as non-science fields. Regulatory affairs has a lot of press lately because of COVID, but they're meant to be, protect public health by providing and enforcing standards and developing and manufacturing drugs that go to the market, or any products that go to the market. And the FDA is the big one. That's the regulatory body of the US, and there are other agencies across the world that are similar to that. They actually provide fellowships. If you are interested in knowing more about what regulatory affairs is and getting into that, they provide fellowships that are paid that often can help lead you to a job in the organization. The same thing goes for policy. There's a lot of different areas that sort of define policy, whether it's science policy or other types of policy. I'm not the best person to speak to that particularly, but I do know that there are fellowships that are available for those who are interested in policy, want to know more about that, or get into it, get their foot wet to see really whether they like it. The AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships are something that I know quite a few people who have done and have currently now have careers in government doing policy. It's a really nice program that I highly recommend, as well as they have great resources if you are interested in knowing exactly what that is. Government positions are not necessarily only federal, there are also state and local government jobs as well as international ones. To look, if you wanted to find more about what jobs are there, the state government websites would have that. USAjobs.gov is really the primary federal government jobs board. And just keep in mind, there are fellowships. It's just a matter of finding them. Any of these particular groups will have links to other fellowships that hopefully may be of interest to your particular field of study. This is my final case study that I have. Shadia is someone I met while I was working at NIH, who was a postdoc at the time. And she found her way into regulatory affairs through a fellowship at the FDA. And she currently now reviews the chemistry manufacturing controls, or CMC, section of drug applications, and also inspects drug manufacturing facilities to ensure compliance with GMPs. She is the person that every industry person fears coming in to see their facility, because they will tell you whether or not you're doing the right things. They will check all the boxes and make sure that all your documentation is in line and everything is fit to standard before you could ever even think about putting something in the market or even in clinical trial. She wanted to help people. She started off with a very basic science background on cancer signaling in yeast, and now has moved on to something more translational that she wanted to be a part of and to be a part of public health. For her, teamwork and communication is really important in this field, as well as being very detail oriented and critically thinking and learning new areas quickly. She did a postdoc because it helped her learn these things, but a lot of this is really on the job through these opportunities like where she went. So how do you find out more about these roles? I only gave you a snippet from what I can gather in the time that I had. But just knowing that they exist, that there are other areas outside of just science and R&D and in the lab, knowing that is the first step, and being proactive and looking further into what those are is the next. There are lots of resources around that are involved in looking at jobs outside the academy, like cheekyscientist.com. Or if you just want to know what skills you have that might fit certain careers, Versatile PhD and myidp.com will have these skills assessments that you can use to help guide you in that way. If you don't have a LinkedIn profile yet, I would highly suggest making one and joining groups like PhD Careers Outside Academia or Higher PhD, which are basically, they're there to help people like you explore different career options and how to get them. One of the best things, and the reason why I put these little vignettes of people out there, is that I find that the best way to really know what a field is to talk to people. Start networking with people that are in those fields, whether that's using your alumni network or connecting with a professional organization that is relevant to your interest. Attending any career-based seminars also helps, because then you can hear the story and perspective of each person's journey. And then if you're able to talk to them, just asking what they do and how they got there, I find is very enlightening. Everyone's journey is different, but there are always common themes that come into play that are helpful to know. And also take advantage of your university graduate resources that have more information for you. So how do you get your positions? And this will probably cause people to eye roll a lot, but networking is really the key to getting jobs, especially in industry. And that includes not just knowing people, but through recruiters, conferences, your alumni network, and LinkedIn. Job boards and company websites are on the minority, and in fact, it's extremely much harder to get a job through those websites. And I can tell you that from experience. for me, getting into industry was definitely the hardest part. And that was back in the day when I really didn't know anyone, and all I did was look through job boards on Biospace, for example, and then also the company websites for the larger companies that I knew. Most biotechs, most people don't know they exist, or they're in stealth mode, so you don't know that they have opportunities. But for these larger ones, it's basically, seeing what they have available and shooting off your resume. And for me, it took me about 4 times applying to the same job that never got filled to finally get noticed. And it was just tweaking that resume and cover letter to find ways to get that attention by HR to then send it to a hiring manager. So it is harder, but after that, your network starts to grow exponentially. And the next couple opportunities that I had come by were through networking, whether through LinkedIn for unposted positions, or as a direct referral, and also direct contact with these smaller organizations. It's usually easier to contact a smaller organization directly than a larger one. But that really makes it easier the moment you get in. But if you say you hate networking and you don't want to do it, just think of it that networking is really just building relationships with people, and that you're doing that every day, whether you're inside the lab or out. And they often may know someone who may know someone else who may know someone else, and it may be 6 degrees of separation until you find someone, but by being able to connect to that and then moving that network closer to you is really what will help you in terms of networking. And if you don't like going to networking events, frankly, don't feel like you have to. I'm an introvert by nature. I hate going to large conferences, but I like talking to people one-on-one. I like to work in smaller groups for doing things, having a purpose to doing something. And so if you are, you can always network through your alumni. You can network through being in a group, being active in a group, a professional group or a social group. If you're at an academic conference, you can talk to people at posters or even at the booths for these different societies. They're there to help you overall. And then when you do get that job posting that you really want to go for, to be really honest, when you're starting out young in your career, especially for large industry roles who are really interested in a skill set, looking for people who are very specific for either disease subject matter expert or for technical skill set, your focus should be on that when it comes to your resume, and not so much on what you did on your dissertation, because for most people who may not know your field, may not know the workings of your dissertation, but they are interested in knowing what technical skills you have. And then also highlighting whatever transferable skills or soft skills, which I know many of you might have heard before and think, well, how do you get those? Those are things that, if you're able to say, put together a presentation or a conference, for example, organizing people to do certain things, doesn't have to be in science. Those are all things that you could highlight in a resume and or a cover letter to get people's attention that you're more than just a pair of hands to do work. For resumes, you need to really tailor that, as well as a cover letter, to the role you're applying for. I can tell you from experience, when I've just sent out resumes to random job postings, I never hear back from them. But having something very tailored to why you fit the role, especially a cover letter that says why you fit the role, that will get the attention of a hiring manager more so than just sending out resumes. And keep your search open to any role that interests you. Even if you feel like you're overqualified or underqualified, sometimes position titles aren't really the be-all end-all. And a lot of times when hiring managers are looking for people, they're actually looking for this is the ideal person we want, knowing that about 60% of that will be what's actually going to be, or 40% of that will be non-existent. And if you are wanting to go into something different, really consider those internships and fellowships. Some of them are paid. They may not be paid a lot, but relative to being a postdoc, it's pretty much equivalent for a couple of years just to get your foot in the door, or even more so, depending on where you are. And be willing to learn new skills and take on new responsibilities. So that will always add to your skill set. Be persistent. Again, it took me a long time to get my first notice, really, and be interested whenever you're talking to someone about potential job role. And as always, even when you're writing grants and you're having trouble getting, people to believe what you want to do is worth getting money for, learning from your mistakes, learning from every attempt that you make to better prepare for the next one is always a good thing to do. It took me so long to just figure out, how do I word something to get noticed? Take those little bits of feedback. Or if, say, for example, you didn't get the job after an interview, getting the feedback of what is it about it? Is it something about your skill set, which is something that's really easy to get, relative to, maybe just personality-wise didn't work out. And that's something, again, that feedback will help you in the next try. Sorry, and then just remember, I want to leave this by saying that people think that success is a straight line, but in reality, a career journey is a journey as it is. It goes in lots of twists and turns. Oftentimes, it might be something that, based off your current situation, might affect your trajectory or something out of your control. And it's really just a journey, learning from that with every twist and turn, reevaluating who you are every so often, and figuring out, is this really what I want to do? Those are really valuable throughout your career, even things that stuff that I do now when it comes to, where I want to go in the next couple of years, and what do I want to learn. That's really, that'll help you throughout when you're looking at different roles. And with that, I have a couple resources here that I think are quite helpful. This blog, this Science Career Guide from Agene, is a really, really helpful one. I would go to the website and see it. This is from my mentor, who is a director at this nonprofit company, who is really into helping PhDs like yourself and science trainees like yourself to go into industry careers. Cheeky Scientist is a paid membership, but there are lots of really good free resources that we're looking at other things aside from academia, and also science and nature articles on careers. With that, let me just see if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Alice, for such a comprehensive presentation. That was wonderful. We do have a question already, which I'll ask in a moment. And I do want to just share with the audience again. If you have questions, feel free to just raise your hand and then unmute yourself or use the chat function. So the first question that we had come in was, how would you use LinkedIn for networking? Make a cold call, email?
So it depends on where you are. If you're on LinkedIn and you see, for example, so I guess a good example is when I was looking for my job that I actually got through LinkedIn. So going from Pfizer to Series, this person actually cold called or cold emailed me through LinkedIn. How he knew me was through a shared acquaintance that we had on LinkedIn. He was a microbiologist. He knew the microbiologist that was one of my advisors as a postdoc, and thought that I just looked at what I had on my LinkedIn profile, and then we had a chat over coffee about what they were actually looking for, someone with as a GI physiologist. So cold emails, I suppose, for people is a possibility if you're looking for just understanding what they do. It really helps. Cold calls can be difficult, but what really helps is if you know someone through LinkedIn that is a mutual acquaintance, or at least they have some knowledge of. Oftentimes you can just say, hey, I know so-and-so, and I saw your profile. I'm really interested in this particular career that you have. I'd love to know more. Just being very open-ended about that. That's how you can starting a conversation. Hopefully that helps.
So our next question is from Julie, and the question is, how do you manage the transition between academia and industry? I know there are boot camps like Insight that helps with that transition, but some cost a lot of money.
I'm not quite sure what that is exactly. Honestly, I don't think it's really worth going to things that cost money. If you're a graduate student and you don't want to really spend them, like I don't want to spend money on that. It's just more of I think how I managed that transition was really doing a lot of research online. So, looking at, what are certain areas to look, what are certain areas that I like, and then how to, if you're looking for particular skill sets, for example, like managing, or, if you see what the description of the role is, they'll kind of give you a sense of what kind of skills would be necessary that are not necessarily bench based. Finding opportunities that would help, that you could be a part of while you're in grad school that can help develop those. So say, for example, you need to be able to be a good presenter or write certain things. Having opportunities to do that more often will help hone those skills better. I hope that helps. I don't, the boot camp thing I'm not aware of. I think it's just a matter of, knowing what kind of things that you can do that may not necessarily be in the lab to help build skills that would be useful across the board, regardless of where you are.
All right. And Alice, if I may ask you, if you wouldn't mind stopping the screen share, just that might help me with seeing if folks have their hands raised a little bit more. Yeah. Okay, so thank you. Another question from Wesley. You mentioned being an introvert. Do you feel that you needed to learn how to be a bit more extroverted for networking?
In some ways, yes. I still get really, I have a hard time when it comes to meeting, especially new people. Even when I go to conferences, for example, I get really, really anxious and tense when I have to go to a microphone and ask a question in the microphone. So I had to really, find ways to get myself to be a little less inhibited to talk to people. And what really helped me was just finding something that made a natural course of conversation. So whether it's small talk, which is something I'm also not great at doing, but I'm able to at least find some sort of level to be able to talk to people in. Or, even if it's just if it's not science, just going out and into groups and trying to be a bit more assertive, I guess, is I'm not really sure if that's where extroverted. I know that I'm really good at being in smaller groups rather than large ones. So for me, it was easier to find smaller groups to really get myself out there to talk to people. And that's really what helped more for me. I'm also much better at communicating online. So for social networking type of purposes, it's actually I've gotten really good at crafting ways to greetings to people that aren't overly aggressive and are more open-ended. So that's something that has helped as well.
Okay, so we have a question now from Cyrus, I believe. Would you say the pressure for obtaining grants is different between industry and academia, or the same?
I think definitely in academia, the pressure for writing grants is more, just because you have a limited budget, and in order to even have your lab, you need to have grants, you need to have funding. Your startup package, if you're an academic, doesn't last that long. And the only way to really get tenure is to actually get grants. So that pressure is a lot higher in academia. In industry, the grant is a nice to have. So for me, when I was writing for grants in industry, it was more so that I could actually support the academic collaborations that I was having. So convincing the corporate to say that this is worth investing in. If I didn't make it, for me, it didn't really matter, but it did mean a lot to the academic collaborators I was working with. For small biotechs that were looking at small business innovation grants from the government, that's also there is a lot of pressure there to get the funding, because for smaller businesses it's more important, but it's also not the only avenue towards getting funding.
Thank you. So our next question is from Jonathan. How early should you start looking and applying to jobs? I'm in my 4th year of my PhD and I'm hoping to be done by the end of the calendar year. Should I start looking for jobs now or wait a bit?
I would just start looking now. you never know, like, you never know when you'll find something that you like. I would look for them, even if it's just casually online and seeing what they are, if you have other methods of finding it. And then just, it's always good to practice. The first time you're trying to get a resume out may not work out. So, it's always good to start. If you do get a job offer or you have interest, most businesses are actually quite understanding of that and are willing to wait until you're done. So I would just start as early as you want to.
Okay, so we have a question from Jordan next. Can you speak to international government positions a bit more? Are these particular positions?
That I can't really help with that. I know that there are other avenues to get there. It's just something that's not in my wheelhouse to be able to answer. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. And the next one is from Meghna. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. How do the roles available differ for someone with a master's versus someone with a PhD?
So for a master's, a lot of times actually in industry, when we're looking for associate scientists, and that's at least in R&D, we're looking for people to help us in the lab to do most of the work. And so the opportunities for masters can be a little bit easier if you are interested primarily in a bench-based job. For a PhD, you also are qualified to be at the bench, and you also are expected to be a lot of times. But then what happens is that you tend to move a little bit upwards a little bit faster in terms of then managing associates and hiring associates that are often in the master's bachelor's category. So I would say, although I do talk a lot about PhDs, masters do work equally as well in a lot of these areas.
We definitely have more time for questions. If folks have, again, feel free, you can raise your hand if you'd like to unmute and ask your question, or continue to use the chat function. We definitely want to maximize the time that we have with Alice today.
And if anyone's interested in the links, I know I linked them and embedded the links in my presentation. If anyone's interested in knowing specifically what those links are, I'm happy to also share that.
So we do have a couple more questions coming in. So another question from Jordan. How did you use your experience in GI physiology to leverage positions?
So that actually is, that's very particular to the roles that I looked for. So at Pfizer, for example, they were looking for scientists in a obesity field, specifically for GI physiology, and even more specifically for enteroendocrine cell biology, which is basically the endocrine cells that secrete the hormones that regulate appetite. And because that was basically the role that I thought was the most relevant, and that's where I leveraged that position, was basically my science skill was exactly what they needed. When I went to Series Therapeutics, again, as a GI biologist, that was a microbiome company, and they wanted to know the interaction between the microbes and the gut. So, and I did that as part of my postdoc degree. So that expertise was really what got them interested in my joining, along with, the skill sets that I have in terms of knowing how drug discovery worked. And then for Fractyl, when I moved there, they're a medical device company that is working in the gastrointestinal tract. So I was in a company mostly of engineers, but they were looking for a biologist. So all of these I leveraged my GI physiology aspect of. It's just in different ways. I also used it when I was at Series, ended up having to change disciplines to inflammatory bowel disease, which is completely different than what I ever learned before, and having to learn a new disease area, but using at least my knowledge of GI physiology for that as well.
Okay, before I go to the next question in the chat, I see Wesley has a raised hand. Wesley, feel free to ask your question.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thanks a lot, Alice, for your presentation. You had mentioned earlier, and I don't remember how you worded it, but it sounded like fairly early on as a graduate student, you had an idea of what you were interested in doing in a career, at least in general. How did you get to that point? When did you know, at least in general, what you wanted to do?
So I'm someone who likes to plan. So when I was originally looking at graduate school, so I was a veterinary student first, and actually it started earlier, like around that point, where I was so focused on veterinary school, for example, that was what my goal was. And then as I realized I didn't really want to be a clinician, I had to go through this feeling of what do I want to do. I like research, but I also like being a veterinarian, so I did both. And trying to figure out how do I fit as that, because now I'm not in the mold of a veterinarian or as a PhD person. How can I do that? And so I did a lot of, like, even in graduate school, I was exploring those fields. I had a couple internships in the government as well as in other universities to get a sense of what veterinary researchers did. So I spent more time focused on that, realizing I didn't want to do that, and then I went into just straight off research. So it was just, I knew from very early on that I liked physiology. I liked the aspect of that, and trying to find a way to apply that to just in general helping people. And so, it was a constant going through these areas of exploration to see, if I was in this position, would I like it? And, that's basically what got me there.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go back to the chat. We had a question: work-life balance in industry versus academia. Your thoughts?
Much better in general. So when I was a postdoc, I worked all the time. I worked more than 50, 60 hours maybe, because it was all about, I wanted to get this done. This is about my work, and that was what's going to make me successful. In industry, it's a very different mindset. It's not about what you do, it's about what the team does and how to solve a common problem, or how to get something to work as a team. And so because of that, you don't have the pressure to constantly be working all the time. It takes a while, though. I think most people who start off in industry try to show that they are committed, and so they work more. But for the most part, in large pharma, 9 to 5 typically is the hours, although at times if there are deadlines, you end up working longer just because of the need. In biotech, the work-life balance can be variable. So if you're in a startup, for example, you're working all the time because you are working for your business to try to make this survive. As they grow a little bit more, it becomes a bit more settled. And so the hours and the work-life balance meld a bit better.
So our next question is, can you speak to differences between small or startup biotech compared to larger industry expectations?
Expectations. Okay, so in a large pharma, usually because it's such a big organization, they're really looking for a specific role. And so they're looking at specific skill sets. The expectation is that, especially if you're a PhD, you're expected to be able to learn really quickly, and to learn the drug discovery process. And eventually you're able to move upwards. You are very focused on that role, and oftentimes you don't really move from that particular role unless you want to find something new. In biotech, the expectation often is, we really need the skill set, and so we need you to help us because you're the only person who could do this. So even when I started to move away from the lab, when I went to biotech, I went back into the lab and had to do a lot of work and set up a lot of things. And often I had to be more of a jack of all trades sort of mentality, because there are a few people and not as many people in specialized roles, you had to learn how to take on other things. So that ends up being, you could not really a specialist in anything. You just know a lot of different things. And that actually is very helpful in that sort of business.
So the final question we have here from Anita, can you expand on weaving through different sectors? Once you leave academia, is it harder to get back in? Is it difficult to go between government and industry?
That's a good question, because I'm trying to understand that myself. In terms of if you leave industry and go back into academia. I know a lot of people who leave academia at various points can successfully transition to industry. So it's not like if you want to be in academia, you don't have to feel like you have to stay in it if you're in there for a long time. I've seen people who made it to tenure and went to industry after that. The other side, I'm not so sure. I think, depending on what is considered, I think there are people that have, it's not as common. It is easier, I think, to move between industries if you're going from small to large, as well as even to government and industry, mainly because there is a lot of crosstalk between government and industry, particularly if you're in regulatory affairs, for example. Those are two roles that are on both sides of the fence. And so if you had, for example, if you're in government, regulatory affairs and government, you know exactly what the standards are to then apply to industry, who are also trying to talk to the regulatory affairs and get their okay. So I think that's very much a possibility.
And I just want to double check if there weren't any final questions. Wesley, did you have another question, or was that from your last question, your hand?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. I just wanted to make sure. And if there are no other questions, Alice, if you would like to share those links with me, I typically send an email to the guests afterwards with links to an evaluation and just confirming the drawing for students. So if you want to send me those links, I can make sure to include that in the email. Or if you'd like to share the entire presentation, I can do that as well. So thank you so much for the presentation today. It was really great. I also want to thank all of the attendees for participating. Before I officially let everyone go, I just want to share again that we have another session coming up next week with Dr. Donna Charlevoix, who'll be talking about building your professional network. So let me actually just drop that registration link in there. And if you have any questions, again, feel free. Let me actually put my email address in. Just give me one quick moment. But yes, this was great. And Alice, I think you mentioned that some of the folks that you had talked to in preparation for this presentation would potentially be available for questions as well. Is that correct?
Yes.
So, anyone feel free to ask me, and I can definitely put you in touch with Alice or any of Alice's connections. So thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Take care.
Thank you.
Stop recording.